All right, good evening. Good evening. My name is Alex Marr, and I'm the Associate Curator for Native American Art at the St. Louis Art Museum. Welcome to the opening program for the ticketed exhibition, Action Abstraction Redefined, Modern Native Art from the 1940s to the 1970s. I want to start by thanking the TRIO Foundation for its support of this program and other programs associated with the exhibition. I often begin programs with a land acknowledgement, so I would like to recognize that the St. Louis region is the ancestral territory for a lineage of Native American peoples, including the Mississippian civilization that built Cahokia and mounds in St. Louis early in the last millennium. In the 18th and 19th centuries, colonial settlement disrupted subsequent indigenous relations with this place. The Osage Nation and members of the Illini Confederacy, including the Peoria Tribe of Oklahoma, know the St. Louis region as part of their homelands. Finally, I want to recognize the diversity of Native peoples who live and work in St. Louis today. So I'm thrilled to welcome you to the museum, to this exhibition, and to this program. We are joined this evening by 3 artists included in Action Abstraction Redefined, Linda Loma-Haftewa, Anita Fields, and Alfred Youngman. Each artist was a student at the Institute of American Indian Arts, or IAIA, during the early days of the school. Founded in 1962 in Santa Fe, New Mexico, IAIA has played an outsized role in the training of many of the leading Native American artists working today, including our panelists. Each studied at IAIA in the 1960s and 70s. So IAIA and its Museum of Contemporary Native Arts originated the touring exhibition, which we opened this weekend. And I want to note that this is the first major ticketed exhibition to focus on Native art of the 20th century at the St. Louis Art Museum. And we're offering an exhibition with a particular focus in the experimental approaches to abstraction developed by artists across the country in the decades following World War II. If you have not yet had a chance to see the exhibition, I encourage you to visit the galleries in the East Building after this program. The museum will be open until 9 tonight. And to see for yourself these remarkable works of art. So in a moment, we will hear from each of the artists, and then we'll engage in a conversation, and we'll have a chance for questions from the audience as well. But first, I want to introduce each of our speakers. So starting with Linda Loma-Haftewa was among the first students who enrolled in IAIA, or the Institute of American Indian Arts, in 1962 when the school opened. She then went on to earn a BFA and an MFA from the San Francisco Art Institute in 1971. She maintained a career as a painter while also teaching at California State College, Sonoma, and University of California, Berkeley from 74 to 76. Later, her work transitioned into multi-layered monotype of silkscreen compositions, often incorporating abstracted cosmological references tied to her homelands and travels. She returned to Santa Fe in 1976 to teach at IAIA and had a long career teaching at the Institute. Her art is in private and public collections, including the Heard Museum in Phoenix, the Fred Jones Jr. Museum of Art at the University of Oklahoma, and the National Museum of the American Indian. Anita Fields creates work across media that reflect the worldview of her Osage culture. Known primarily today as a ceramicist and textile-based artist, her early work in the exhibition includes prints and a painting. She attended IAIA from 1972 to 74 and received a BFA from Oklahoma State University. As a student, she developed skills in printmaking that would later play a role in her clay sculpture. Many of her decorations in ceramics are printed into by clay. Her work is included in the collections of the Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art, the Heard Museum, MIA, the Minneapolis Institute of Art, Museum of Art and Design, and the National Museum of the American Indian. And finally, artist, writer, and educator Alfred Youngman attended the Institute of American Indian Art from 1963 through 68. In 1972, He graduated from the Slade School of Fine Arts at the University College London. He received his MA at the University of Montana in 1974, studying in the graduate program in American Indian Art. In 1977, he began teaching at the University of Lethbridge, where he eventually became chair of Native American Studies. The young man received his PhD in anthropology from Rutgers in 1997, and he's published extensively on the field of Native American art. He's also lectured internationally, including a faculty exchange program at Leeds University and Hoka Gakuen University in Hokkaido, Japan. From 2007 to 2010, he worked as department head of Indian Fine Art at First Nations University of Canada in Regina, Saskatchewan. Please join me in welcoming our artists.
Okay, thank you, Alex. First of all, I just want to thank the curators from Institute of American Indian Arts who began Action Abstraction Redefined, and that is Manuela Woloffman, Tatiana Lautenhafter-Singer, and Laura Evans, and to Alex Marr for this beautiful iteration here at SLAM. And I want to thank them for bringing visibility to this important marker in the timeline of contemporary Native art. And I'm very honored to be here. So I, like Alex said, am primarily a ceramicist, but I also, in the last few years, have started doing a lot of textile work. And as Alex mentioned, my work is based in the worldview of the Osage cosmology, specifically seeing the world divided between the earth and sky and water. And within that, all of the complexities of the earth and our connection to the earth. As Wajaji people, these are the guiding forces in our life. So this is, as a student at the Institute of American Indian Arts, this is one of the works that is exhibited in this exhibit here. And this is a wood block. And I have, I was telling Linda just a moment ago that I remember making this actually. And it was, I had never done printmaking. It was all new to me. And so we started out with a wood block. And this was a 2-block series. And really, you know, coming from, as a young person with not very much of an art background, I had only taken art in high school. So being inspired, thinking of the kind of work that, you know, I want to do, you have these assignments, and then I remember thinking, you know, a lot about just natural formations in the earth, fissures in the earth, fissures in, you know, the dirt that we walk on. And those were the types of inspiration that took me to this abstract series of woodcuts. This is, oh my goodness, what year? 2021. And this is called On Behalf of Water, and it was made for an exhibit that was in New Jersey. These are about 14 inches high. And I do, in my work, I do a lot of figurative work. These were, the show was particularly about water. And this show came about pretty soon after the No Dapple Standing Rock, the protest at Standing Rock. And my children had spent sufficient time, a long time. One of them spent months there at Standing Rock. And we were having all these conversations about this time period and about how Native people were supporting one another and in unison, you know. And I told them, I said, you know, from my memory, that this kind of thing had not happened in a very, very, very long time. And so it was, you know, very important. And I made this series of figures called On Behalf of Water, of people standing up for their rights, other Native people supporting them, tribes supporting each other. And so some of the figures have, the mask on. One of them is in the center, with her fist in the air. But along with that, I also think of making art as a form of resistance, for many of us, because you have to be strong and you have to be courageous and you have to think about the things that I'm inspired by everyday activities. Some of them I don't like, what goes on in the world. And so art is one way that I have of dealing with these kinds of things. But they are holding these remnants from tents that came from the Standing Rock camp. And one of my sons stayed up there a long time, and he was actually there when they evacuated Standing Rock. And so he was part of a group that was helping to clean up, take as many tents down as they could. They were frozen in the ground. And he met somebody who was going to take all these tents and take them to a warehouse. And he actually, my son is an artist also. He went there and gathered up some of these tents and made a series, they were called tent formations, about that time period. But he had these scraps, and I was in his studio, and I said, what are you gonna do with those scraps? And he said, oh, I hadn't thought about it. And I said, I'll take them. And so they're holding these scraps from the tents that were at Standing Rock. This is a current textile work called What the Elk Could Not Foresee. I do a lot of type of, collage making in my work. You could probably see that there's fiber on those figures. Because I also have a lot of scraps from when I'm making work, and I just keep everything in these boxes, and I keep documents, and I've been collecting things since I was in my early 20s. Any information on Osage people or Wajaji, which is what we refer to as we refer to ourselves as Wajaji. And so I have all kinds of documents. I have documents that pertain to me, my family. The elk is a central figure in our creation story. Our belief is that the elk created the earth, and when he rolled around to create, we came from the water. Well, we came from the sky, landed in the water, called on the great elk to help us to create the earth. And when he rolled around, his fur stuck to these little clumps of clay, and that is when things started growing. So when I was making this piece, I was really deeply thinking about, I wonder if the elk knew what was in store for us. So I started, kind of pulling out these documents that I have, and one of them is a document that I signed when I was in my 20s from the Bureau of Indian Affairs that states that I am not competent. And it's a long story, but short story is these types of demeaning documents still exist for us as Native people. And so there's a copy of that document on there. But along with that are remnants from ribbons that we wear as Osage women in our clothing. There are ribbon work designs that identify us as Wajaji people. There are, my eyesight is not as good as it used to be. But, a lot of these things are the kinds of things that we include in our clothing. And I also, when I was thinking about this piece, one thing that I wanted to say was this ribbon work that is the black and white graphic design would be on the left. I think it's really interesting to note that that is very abstract design. And so abstraction, I know when we talk about it, that, it's something that, as a young person, it took me a long time to figure out that before I went to any formal training, before I went to art school, that my first indications of art and pattern and design came straight out of my grandmother's trunks when she held our traditional clothing. This is called To Know Your People Are Beautiful, and this is based on another Osage garment. This is an iconic garment that is worn at ceremonies as Osage people, and that's a really long, complex story that we don't have time to talk about tonight. But this This is based on the history of us as Osage people. As late as the late 1700s, when we were having negotiations with foreign powers, the French and the United States, they gave us these military coats. And so the Osage men would bring them back to our community, and the women started utilizing them in an Osage wedding. And these were marriages, arranged marriages between clans. And so so these, we still see these in some of our ceremonies in terms of they are given away as a sign of respect and honor. And I've always I thought it was so wonderful that these still exist and that I see them as walking billboards of our history. And so for years and years and years, I wanted to make one that was more art and, talked about our history. And so this was my first attempt at that. And around it, surrounding it, are symbols that are, we are familiar with as Osage people. There are symbols from our orthography, and there are also facsimiles of research that I did at the Gilcrease Museum from journalists, agents, Bureau of Indian Affairs people that were written pretty soon after we made our way into Indian Territory. And so they're very demeaning, they're very dehumanizing. And so I wanted to include those because my whole thought process in this is, despite all of the things that are said about us and the things, misinformation, things that are wrong, is that we have always known who we are in a very beautiful way through our language, through our culture, and through our art. This is currently here in St. Louis, and this is called Way Back. This is part of the Counterpublic 2023 triennial, and I collaborated with my son, who is a musician. So there's a sound to this. There's a sound component to this installation, and this is in the very close proximity to Sugarloaf Mound. Sugarloaf Mound is one of the last remnants of mounds here in St. Louis. And the Osage Nation has purchased that because, as Alex was saying, in the beginning, that this was our ancestral homeland, and this is still home. This is made of a series of platforms. These platforms you would see where I'm from, and they would be used for people to sit and visit, to you would find them like at family camps, at our ceremonies, at dances, outside of a home if you're getting ready to go in for a feast. People just relax and sit on them, enjoy themselves. And really it was based on a very fond memory that I have when I was a very young person, going around with my grandmother to lots of social events, lots of Osage social events, and remembering elder people folding up their Pendleton blanket, putting it down, sitting on it, and somebody might hand them a lemonade, and they might take out a smoke, and they'd start visiting with each other, and then all of a sudden they'd be laughing and really teasing one another. So again, this was quite emotional to make for my son and I, because way back refers to us making our way back, reclaiming this site, reclaiming this land that is our original homeland. And they are embellished with Osage designs that is found there, these graphic designs that are found on our traditional clothing. We have a deep history here with the interaction with the French, which brought on trade. Trade brought products that we had never had, needles, thread, satin. This is how ribbon work began.
Good evening, I'm Linda Lohaftiwa. I'm Hopi in Choctaw. I grew up in Arizona, and I want to thank Alex and St. Louis Art Museum for inviting me to come and the other artists to talk about our work that are in the exhibition. I attended IIA when the school first opened in 1962, it's a boarding school, and I was going to the Phoenix Indian School, and my mother had read an article in the paper saying, they're gonna open up a new Indian art school, do you wanna go? And I said, yes. So we applied over the summer to attend IIA, and that's why I ended up getting there. So my mother is Choctaw from Oklahoma, my father is Hopi from Arizona, and they met in boarding school. So because it's two different tribes, and they could both speak their languages, but they couldn't speak to each other because it's two different languages, right? So we grew up mostly, because we lived in Arizona, we grew up mostly going to Hopi. My father would take us to the ceremonies, and so when I attended I had, that knowledge of my Hopi background that I used in my work. So I was like, I think 14 years old or something when I first started attending. I was a sophomore in high school, and I did 2 years of I was studying commercial art, and my advisor, my teacher advisor, suggested that why don't you go into painting, fine arts. So I said, okay. So my last year of high school is when I started painting. And this is one of the paintings that I did in high school. The atmosphere of the school was, when I think about it now, it was pretty wild. I mean, it was open. You could just, go into the studio and work. I mean, we had classes. We had our academic classes as well as the studio classes. And you could just go in there and work, and we kind of learned from each other, like watching what each other did. And what was happening at the time was a lot of applying different things to the canvas for texture, like glue and paper and sand. So we were all experimenting, and that's what abstraction is about anyway, just learning and experimenting. So this is and we painted in oils at the time, and we could just ask for what size canvas we wanted, and it would be in our studio the next day or a few days, and we would just paint. So it was good. So it wasn't all just in the painting studio. We had other classes as well that we had to go to. So this is I like to draw a lot, so I just play around with color and designs, and again, thinking about things that I learned growing up from my parents about knowing who you are and where you come from, and using that as a base for to produce your work. So because my work is abstract, I'm still thinking about ceremonies that happen. I think about the landscape. I think about words and prayers that are said throughout throughout the ceremonies, and family. So landscape and family is really important to me. So again, like the spiral and the circular designs are about the circle of life and things that you go through in life. So this is a pastel ink. When I went to the San Francisco Art Institute, I went to school there and got my BFA and MFA, and taught 2 years at Cal State Sonoma and 2 years at Berkeley. And then I was basically recruited to come back to IA to teach. So when I returned back to Santa Fe to teach painting, I was still painting. This is acrylic landscape. This is after I returned back to Santa Fe, and just the colors in New Mexico are just really strong and vibrant. So, the night skies are really beautiful and you see a lot of stars. So and those animals are out there doing things. So I like to include them in my work as well, in an abstract way. In this painting I did, was 2010. I'm referencing my mother's mound culture of the Choctaw people. Originally, they were from Mississippi and moved on the Trail of Tears to Oklahoma. And so I was thinking about incorporating mound work in my pieces. So this is what I came up with for this particular piece. And this is remembering our Choctaw ancestors. So the mound in the middle would be the shape of Nanawaya, which is the Mississippi mounds in Mississippi. And believe it or not, when I was doing these, the particular image in the middle of the mound, I had started out with this shape of doing a mesa referencing of landscape. And one time at one of the art shows, Nita said, "Your work looked like a mound." And I said, "Oh," so then I switched it and started doing mound. And I started incorporating that into my work, and then since then have been doing mound research with America Meredith. We've traveled to different mound places, Spiral Mound to all the way to across southeastern states to North Carolina. We've gone up to Ohio. We've gone to Wisconsin, and then of course Cahokia over here is really nice. We took that visit this morning to visit and our ancestors and to say hello and respect for our people.
And good evening, everybody. I would like to first thank Anita and the Osage people for accepting me into their territory, above all. That's a protocol that we follow as First Nations people in Canada and as a Native American. When we go to each other's reservations, traditional territories which are outside the reservations, we thank them for inviting us. And it's only appropriate that I think Anita as a representative of the Osage. People here whose territory this is. I'd also like to thank Alex Marr for inviting me. It's incredible. I have to say I'm deeply honored to be here. I understand that the space the exhibit's in used to be the permanent collection with Jasper Johns, Robert Rauschenberg, and one of the great pop artists there. And they gave it over to us. I thought, wow, that is incredible. It's amazing, just, I don't know. Too much to hope for. It's great. If I can get this thing going. One of the works in this show is Indian Blanket that I completed at IAI, and I reasoned that blankets are integral to us. We've always had them, and they come in all kinds of sizes and shapes and uses. I thought, yeah, you could put this on a couch, put it on a bed, you can wear it. Who's ever painted one? So I decided to paint one. was an experiment at the time. And I didn't think about it at the time, but I could have probably taken it as a series and taken off of that. But that's not the way I work. I work from the last painting to the next one. And whatever I learned from the last one, I'll bring forward to the next. This one here is a postcard Indian and British soldier. When I was in London, I stayed there for 4 years doing my undergraduate studies at the Slade School. It was right down to what you could call central London, and had many fantastic experiences there, and a lot of famous people. There were people who wanted to meet me because I was an American Indian from Montana. Never met an Indian person before. And they call us Red Indians. I can't imagine why. But I was homesick, couldn't come home. My two brothers were drafted. They were already doing service. So although I enlisted, they wouldn't take me. Like the movie in Private Ryan, MIT. Two brothers and three. So I stayed in London for 4 years without coming back, and I became anglicized. By the time I came back, I was speaking Cockney. My family couldn't understand me. And I had to reacculturate myself, because when I left, there was one kind of car on the road, people were dressing in a certain way, there was a certain kind of music. I get back and everything has changed. A complete stranger in my own land. Go out to Montana and I fell into this anthropological dialogue with myself, what I learned in London, that we were primitive savages. And, that's how they looked at us. And I became something of a backyard celebrity over there because I was an Indian and they all wanted to have an Indian at their parties. I remember David Hockney, who was my tutor for a while. He said, "Why don't you go to Sotheby's?" I said, "Why do I want to go there?" He says, "Oh, they'll enjoy your wildness." And I thought, well, no, I don't think so. I wasn't much for living up to the anthropological stereotype. There's no way that I could be a primitive person or a savage person, even though that's primarily an invention of Western science. It has nothing to do with us as Native people. But it took me a long time to shake that off. It's something that we're still dealing with, I'm afraid. So I painted this Indian postcard because I was homesick. And this is a Indian here, and back here, that's the British soldier. And around the corner from where I lived in this old 15th century Georgian half circle. They built that used to be the outskirts of London. You walk out in the field and you'd be on the edge of London. Now today it's all surrounded, of course. And there was a pub around the corner and I was having a beer. And this British sergeant came in and we started talking and I told him I was from Montana. He said, "Well, why don't you come and fight for the Queen?" I said, "I don't think so." So I thought I'd immortalize him and put him in a painting. And this is a color picture of it. I don't know why this thing doesn't work yet. I decided to do a black and white of it because the last one I had a piece of cellophane over it, and when I took the slide, I forgot to take it off. And this painting later appeared in American Heritage magazine. It was on the cover of American Heritage magazine. Quite an honor. I think your battery's dead on here. This one here is called Contempt. After being there for a while, I got to know the art scene fairly well, and decided to do some minimalist work. So the slide on the right is a close-up of what you're seeing on the larger piece. And I wanted to prove I could paint and stick with a painting. Because most people were finishing paintings in months, a couple of months. It took me 9 months to do this. 8 hours a day. Each one of those triangles you see there are individually painted. There's no two alike. And I finished it, and my friend says, "Are you still working on that canvas 9 months later?" I said, "Yeah." "It must be a labor of love." I said, "Yeah, it is." But I wanted to prove what I'd heard about artists in Europe. They would stick with a painting for 35 years. I thought, well, I can do 9 months easy. So. But while I was there, I learned a lot about Indian people from the European perspective. And they have some very fanciful stories about us. And I'm afraid I fell into those stories. And when I came back, I had to unlearn all of that. And when I went back to Montana, I had to get back into my tribe, Chippewa Cree Rocky Boy Reservation in Montana. And I had to get back into the ceremonies and learn all of that all over again. And I spent a lot of time there reconnecting with my family. And now I'm fully connected. It feels great. But I went to Columbia at the invitation of the State Department. And they have some Indian reservations down there, just right up here. And they wanted me to be an artist representative for the Indian artists there, because they wanted the Indian artists there to see what we were doing up here. And at the end of the residency, we had to produce an artwork. So I produced this artwork called Four Directions. And it's the 4 colors that we honor as Native people. And it's made of native rock from Colombia, and everything is from Colombia. I had it in this museum, and I was laying it out in the 4 directions. I had a compass, and I was looking at the 4 directions, and I noticed it was off kilter. What is going on here? So I told the museum director, "You know your museum is not a north-south axis, that it's a kilter?" He says, "Yeah, funny, you should find out." I said, "Why is that?" He says, "Because back in the 80s, it was blown up. Terrorists had blown it up." He said, "We had to build it again. They didn't do it right." So I found out the terrorists blew this thing up. And Columbia was quite an experience. You don't want to go down that road as Americans. Let me put a little political cut in here. Columbia has soldiers on every corner with guns, in their schools, outside their gas stations, convenience stores, wherever you go, museums. And at night you can hear gunfire. I can't believe people in the United States want to go that way, because that's where we're going right now. Continue going down this road. There's something in Congress there's an act that was introduced by Elizabeth Warren called the Boarding School Act. It's for us who went to boarding schools. I grew up in boarding schools, on the reservation in Montana, on the Blackfeet Indian Reservation. And I would urge you all to write to your congressman and tell him to support that, because America has to learn about its true history. If it's ever going to get beyond this, what I call this adolescent growing up. Because compared to countries in Europe, we're still a very young country. We're still growing to do. And leave that with you. And I thank you for inviting me and enjoy the show. Thank you.
Well, thank you each for taking us on a very quick overview of your the depth of your artistic work over decades, which of course for each really picked up and started at the Institute of American Indian Arts. So I'm hoping that we can have a conversation relatively free form. But I want to start by talking about IAIA because it plays such a large role in the exhibition Action Abstraction Redefined. And each of you were there towards the beginning of the institution. So my first question is simply, what was the artistic and educational environment like at the school?
Like I said earlier, because it was such a new school, it was pretty much free, for what was taught in the classes. We had a whole variety of classes that was offered, the performing arts, studio arts, and it was just so much offered to us that everyone was experimenting in all the classes, and the students that were there came from all different nations, across the United States and from Canada. So we all were learning from each other as well about our cultures and how some were similar and some were a little different. But, we're all taking that information and using it to create our work.
I very much agree with Linda. It was a very exciting time. I went there from 72 to 74. And, just mirroring what was happening in pop culture, in the United States. There was, that was an influence. It was very exciting to be there. It was very experiential. We were encouraged to try every medium that, we could get our hands on to find the place that, that we were most passionate about. For myself, that was the first time I had ever worked with clay. I went there wanting to be a painter, but soon found, myself entrenched in clay and loving working with clay. And just as Linda said, it was, for many of us, the first time to meet young people like ourselves who were interested in the arts from other nations, from other tribal nations. And there was a great exchange of information between each other and long conversations with each other. We were informing each other and inspiring each other, and everybody was young and passionate and very excited about making art. So to me, it was a very exciting environment, and we had a lot of access to materials, really, really fine art materials, and it was just an exciting time. I mean, when I left Institute of American Indian Arts, I also went to other universities and 2 or 3 universities before I got my degree, and with the understanding that, it was not going to be like the Institute of American Indian Arts because of the experiential kind of component that existed there. So it was, for an artist, I think it was great because that is the way you learn.
Yeah, I believe all of us experienced the school differently. One thing I learned about art schools in London was that it's the artist that makes the school. It's not the other way around. And I think the artist made the institute what it is. I was talking about boarding schools. I went to boarding schools from a very young age and couldn't speak our language, couldn't practice our customs. In short, we were discouraged from being who we were in an attempt to make us into something we weren't. And we would often be brutalized, starved, strapped. It was as bad as any prison you could think of today. And we were prisoners, we didn't know it. My grandmother, who lived to be 113 years old, could speak only Cree, and I could not speak to her. They took all that out of me. I didn't have a grandmother that I could relate to. We'd have to talk in sign language. By the time I got to the Institute, all of that was still in me. And the Institute at that time was a BIE school. And they still had some of these old boarding school ideas. And they kept us penned up like that, I felt. There was a chain link fence around the perimeter, as much to keep us in as to keep the local people out. One thing I found extremely interesting was that I was in a pen with 87 different Indian tribes. It was great. We all came more or less from the same general background as referring to our relationship with the U.S. government and how we were treated. We would often talk about things like anthropology. They say we're primitives and savages. And one of my friends says, yeah, we're 30,000 years behind these people. 30,000 years behind them. How can we ever catch up? We were brutally told that we wouldn't amount to anything. Don't even try. Forget about it. You're an Indian. What can you do? What can you possibly give anybody? I had high aspirations, and I was surprised when I actually did finally attain my PhD from Rutgers University in New Jersey, and where anthropology was, again, on the ascendancy, and they pretty much were teaching us from that perspective, and they kept us around, I felt, as kind of curiosity. Students could come and say, hey, there's an Indian, there's an Navajo from out west in New York City. We were always the oddity, and all of that influenced my art. And at the University of Lethbridge, we had to teach from the Native perspective. And I said, what's that? Because no one ever taught me that in any school I went to. So I had to develop one myself. I had to go do the research and find it, and write books on it, because in the university, you publish or perish. And I certainly wasn't going to write from an anthropological perspective because I could not fit within that category. I didn't know how to fit myself in there. Such a person could not exist. But we were being taught that we were. There's a whole life experience that informs my work, and it continues to inform my writing. And the books I publish are done from an anthropological scientific methodology. My reservation has me down as the only anthropologist on the reservation. I think it's kind of funny. But I don't know if that's a dig at me or if it says, yeah, we're proud of you. But that's how I found at the Institute. They allowed us to explore as well. Even though they were politically, they were very conservative in what they were teaching us. Nevertheless, there were some of us who were just radical enough to do the radical thing and bust out of the ideology that was being forced on us. And when I got to London, at school, I had to keep my hair cut short. They wanted that. You wouldn't have your shirt out like this. They'd say you're sloppy. When I got to London, I started growing my hair and it got a little bit too long. And I said, I gotta go get a haircut. So I went and cut it off, and my friend says, what do you cut your hair for? I said, well, because at school they said we had to have short hair all the time. They said, nobody cares here. I said, great. So I let it grow and it got down to here. And I never let anybody touch it after that. But it's short now because I was scalped by some rednecks in Ottawa, Canada. Probably the last Indian to be scalped, literally. So I know what that's like. But I could tell you other exciting stories too, but I think that's enough.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Alfred. I think that it's important to recognize, right, that IAIA was founded by the federal government and was founded at the site of a boarding school, the Santa Fe Indian School, before that. And there's still a relationship with the federal government, but the administration has, developed quite a bit over the years. Linda, do you want to talk a little bit about kind of the changes that have happened at IAIA since the early 60s?
From what time?
Just a very broad, because you probably know the history of the institution the best because of your long association with it.
Yeah, so when I graduated from high school in 1965 and went to San Francisco and, was out there for like 7 years. And when I came back to teach, the school had just gone through a whole thing of the AIM movement, and students were, a few students had been protesting, and some of the artwork was destroyed. But it was a little different, but it didn't seem that different, for the change. Of course, it's all different, new people, new teachers. So, but we still have the high school program then, and then eventually it changed into a 2-year and then 4-year college. So, and I retired like 6 years ago, so I was with IA for like 40 years teaching. So I did see a lot of changes, but I don't know, it's like a blur in a way to me too.
Great, thanks so much. Well, let's talk a little bit more about the 1960s and 70s at IAIA. We've talked about kind of the experimental approach in the art studios and also the relationship to the BIA, Bureau of Indian Affairs. But what about what was happening more broadly in the country, right? All institutions exist in a context. So what were how would you characterize the movement for contemporary Native art and IAIA's role in the 1960s and 70s? And then there's a second part to this question as well. How can we see that legacy today, and what's happening differently today?
Thinking about that question, I went there, like I said, in, the early 70s, but there was already, I felt like a legacy that had, was there, even though it was just very, maybe 6-7 years before that. And that was that we were aware of T.C. Cannon and Linda. And, I have stated that Linda was very aware of a woman who was successful and, gone on to the San Francisco Art Institute and very, established in that way. And so you had you had artists young artists to look up to emulate, to be inspired by. And you also had, this was, if we think in terms of the timeline of contemporary Native art, the importance of the Institute of American Indian Arts in those kinds of terms is that this was the beginning of contemporary Native art. And so we were part of that process. And of course, at that time, you don't think of it like that. You don't think this is, what I'm doing here. But, as you look back over the years, then you absolutely see it in that light. But already that had been established even before I got there. And so, we definitely were inspired by these folks. And I want to tell you too that there on campus, people's paintings, people's work was visible. It was visible in the dining halls. It was visible in the museums. It was, some of their pieces were left to be, to be seen. And so it was, outside of a museum setting, we were looking at those and very aware of the kind of work that was happening there. And because of the experimentation that was encouraged, and because we were encouraged to look at our culture, this was very new. This was very new in terms of, and yes, you know, the remnants of the Bureau of Indian Affairs. If you're a Native person, you're very aware of the Bureau of Indian Affairs and your relationship, you know, to that, how it affected you and your tribe, how you have to go about your business, working, you know, when you go to the agency, and accompanied my parents and my grandparents, you know, my grandmother very many times, you know, to the agency. And so it's just something that you're used to, but it is a federal regulated operation.
Quite an operation, yeah. When I got there was no such thing as a computer. We had one of these Zoom conferences last year about this show. There were some students from IE there, and they said, "What did you guys do before there were computers?" I said, "Well, we were creative." Because we did a lot of things. I don't want to portray IAI as that time as being all doom and gloom, because there were some really excellent things about it. They had a great ski program. We'd go up and ski in the same deep Crystal Mountains, and learn to ski there. And they had rodeos. We'd go out to rodeos and ride horses and get bucked off. We had bands. We had about 7 different bands on campus, and we were the best in the state. We were pretty good. Some of you who are old enough to remember Life magazine back in the 60s, they something about the Red Man. There was a psychedelic Indian on the front. My band is in that magazine. Go look it up. We gained fame. It was an exciting time, no doubt about it. Being there with all these different Indian people from all over the United States, from Alaska, from Florida, from New York, New Mexico, Alaska. Virtually any tribe you could name was there, or they had representatives there. And we learned from each other. We told each other stories. We educated each other. And some of my most learned experiences came from other students, like Kevin Renstar, Earl Biss. They taught me music, and they taught me how to paint. The instructors I had there were good, but very often they were not teaching us what we needed to be learning. So we learned more from each other. And by the time I went to the Slade School, they had already put me in a graduate class. They thought I was a graduate student. We were producing at such a high level of productivity. And of course, my instructor, Bernard Cohen, some of you might know of his work. When I graduated, he said, "You're a star student. Did you know that?" I said, "No." "Great." Good to know. So that's about the way it went.
Thank you. Yeah, I want to talk a little bit more about the theme of the exhibition, which of course is focused on abstraction. And this is one of the approaches that was active in the experimental framework of IAIA. And so the question really is, like, what, as an approach, what did abstraction mean to you as a student at IAIA? What kind of conceptual possibilities did it allow that figuration or other forms landscape may not have allowed? And how have you continued to work with and think about how has your engagement with abstraction kind of evolved since then?
Okay. Well, at that time, I really wasn't thinking it in terms of abstraction, you know, in a formal way. It's not like, I'm going to make this and I'm going to keep in mind abstraction. With everything that has been said and the experimentation that was going on, encouraged, and being influenced by each other, and these, powerful conversations between one another, and very passionate about what we were doing. I think on its own, it just, the experimentation drove that anyway. And so, but like I said, when I was pointing out, the graphic ribbon work, it took me a long time to figure out that, oh my gosh, my early training was not in art school. It was not, in these formal settings. It was straight out of my grandmother's trunk. To realize that is abstraction, and a huge influence on me, because my Wajaji people were just, and that is a continuum of what they had been doing previously. It's just that they had newer materials to use, and they had they had access to these things that I was talking about that they didn't have access to before. But that was simply a continuum of what they had always been doing. And so I think of, the process of making art, of what I am doing is also just a continuum of, what I was doing, what I was informed by at the Institute of American Indian Arts, heavily influenced by that, in a way to look at making art, to think about making art. And so, today, sometimes I want to return to that. It was a more pure, I feel like it was a purer form of working than maybe sometimes some of the ways that I work now. So, it had a great impact on me. And I just think all the experimentation that was going on just lent itself to that abstraction.
Yeah, I agree with that. And the learning from each other, and I remember courses like Indian aesthetics, or we had our native instructors talk about their culture and how they use it in their work, like Anthony Loloman, Charles Loloman, Alan Hauser, and Lloyd New, and they would talk about their cultural background, and how they use, how they make creative an art piece out of a ceremony from their culture. So that played a big part of it too. I think with learning from each other. I just remember that course and just listening to what they talked about, and it was just really inspiring for me to hear that from them, and how if you understand your culture, you can create anything. So it was really a positive course, and how you can carry it on today, and teach it as well. Inspiration from a song, a ceremony, a story. It's you think about all those things when you're doing your work, creating.
We find that same thing on the plains. Abstraction is something that's always been there. We've always painted in one form or another. We were thinking abstractly all the time. The language we were using was referring to abstractions. I was told by a anthropologist from Vienna. He says Native Americans don't have any sculpture, and just like we didn't have no wheel, we never created a wheel, but we had the zero. I don't know how you get along in Europe without the zero all those years, but we didn't have it. But when you ask Native artists about this idea of abstraction, The petroglyphs, the pictographs you see on all the painted rocks, wherever you find them, those are abstract language in their purest form. They're not attempts to write, they are actually communicating to you. And if you try to do that, those colorful Plains Indian teepees you have with iconic symbols on them, and that's all a language. You can read that. That tells a story. That tells us who we are. Our artwork serves us in the same way your churches, your libraries, your courthouses, everything you call civilized serve you. That's what our artwork, that's what our culture does for us. And it still does. Whether you're talking about the artwork on the Northwest Coast, the Plains Indians, the Woodlands Indians, it's all the same thing. I stopped asking about realistic images when I realized that these were realistic images to us. They're very real, and they tell us who we are. If you have a painted lodge on the Blackfeet Indian Reservation, there's a certain teepee that goes in a certain place according to family, lineage, and heritage. The teepee faces a certain way, the colors are on a certain side. Everything is thought out beforehand, and nothing's left to chance. And still today, that's the best lodge ever developed for us because it serves all of our purposes. The first mobile home. How do you like that? It's not seen that way, but very often we're told these abstract images, the teepees, which is abstraction in its purest form to us, came over from Siberia. And of course, nothing probably could be further from the truth. We have our mythologies, where we came from. And I think one thing I learned at IAIA from all the students was their mythology and how they lived it and what it meant to them, how important it was. If they say they came from the earth, they came from the underground, that's good enough for me. That's what I teach. I don't teach you they came over the Bering Straits because there's no way you can prove that. I looked into it. I went to Japan. I asked them over there if somebody left here to go to North America, and they said no. I went to the source. So abstraction, again, is our vocabulary. That's what we're all about.
Great, thank you. I want to make sure that we have time for questions from the audience. So unless there's anything else that you want to address before we do that, let's open it up.
Yeah, I wanted to go back to when you asked a question about contemporary work that came out of IAIA. All the years that I've taught and I've been in different art shows, different art markets, and judged across the nation. And every time I judge at an art show, I notice that there's always award winners that went to IAIA. They were always at the top of the award-winning art shows. So we're still leading the way.
Yeah, somebody mentioned to me not too long ago something similar to that, and they said, in all of these discussions that we have, all roads lead back to IAI.
One of the great things is I teach still. I'm retired, but I'm still teaching part-time for Mount Royal University in Calgary. And almost invariably, at the end of the course, student will say, why haven't we learned this before? Why haven't they taught this to us before? And my answer to that is, I think Ron DeSantis is in town, I don't know. But really, it is something that is so basic to the fundamental history of this country and Canada. I really don't know why it isn't. It should be taught all over the place. So.
Well, great. Thanks so much. If there are questions from the audience, we're more than happy to spend some time opening up the dialogue now. And there's somebody in the in the
Thank
audience with a
thank you for
microphone.
this wonderful program. I wonder if any of you have any special memories of some of your teachers at IAIA?
Yeah, I had Lloyd New, who was actually the founder of IAIA, one of the leading founders of IAIA. And I had fabric silks, screen printing, took a class of fabric design with Lloyd New. And today, you know, a lot of my work is in the collection of the IAIA. And they still use a lot of the pieces that we produced at that time in different art shows. But Charles Loloma jewelry, I took a class from him. Nathalie Loloma. I didn't take any ceramics from her, but I just enjoyed her being a teacher there. And again, looking up to our Native people as teachers. Alan Hauser, who was always a very humble man, and I really appreciate that. Also, Mrs. Wap, Mrs. Josephine Wap from Comanche Nation. It was just good to look up to our Native instructors that were there.
I don't recall anybody specifically. They were all great teachers, I think. I learned something from every one of them. Ellen Hauser, it was fantastic to get to know him. I knew Fritz Scholler. We had our battles. We didn't get along. Louis Ballard, who was a music teacher, we had our bands and he encouraged us to play our music. Seymour Tubis, who was not a Native person, but he was doing his own art thing. Ralph Partington. It wasn't always Native people that I felt were the most important. Many of the artists who came through there were non-Native people, and they were so unlike any other BIA teacher I had because they came from the outside. They didn't come through the system on reservations. So I appreciated them. They brought a new perspective to us.
It's been very interesting to hear the reminiscing about IAIA, but it's not clear, is IAIA still functioning? Is it still a viable institution?
Yes, we are a four-year university or college with degrees in studio arts, creative writing, cinematic arts, museum studies, a great museum studies program. They just developed a museum research program there. Let's see, what else do we have?
Yeah, if I could actually also respond to that question. The other major program for this exhibition is a collaboration with the Creative Writing MFA program at IAIA. So we'll offer a literary festival with 4 Native writers associated with IAIA today in late July, and then a series of workshops with each of those writers as well.
It's gone through several evolutions, I think. When I first went there, everybody who was there had to be a card-carrying member of a tribe somewhere. And I've got my card in my pocket, which helps me get across the border, by the way. Jay's tree. It's good to have. But today they allow students from all over the place, which is a good thing, I think. It's still functioning great, yeah.
I feel like when thinking about, you know, the instructors and the teachers and, you know, when you were mentioning the museum studies program and Chuck Daly and a lot of these instructors really, you know, were, because we were young, they just I mean, they not only were our instructors, but they took great care and trying to take care of us also. And so I remember that, John Kindred was the painting teacher, and he was very kind and generous in his, not only his, profound knowledge of painting, but also in how to gently and subtly show us how to be a painter. So, yeah, it was at Ralph Partington. I mean, that's where I discovered clay. And he too was very encouraging and just, never told you, oh, that's not going to work. He just let you figure it out on his, I remember I just started making these big, huge things right away. And of course they were toppling and all this kind of thing. But that is exactly how you learn. So yeah, the teachers were great and, very impressive. I mean, I remember thinking, gosh, Alan Hauser is here and you can go down there and in and out of the studios and, on any given day. It's wonderful.
One of the things I learned in London was that art is the highest source of knowledge. And I take that to heart when I teach my students that. And I said, you have to be brave enough when you do your research and writing to talk about things that are unpopular too. Because those often are the springboards for the art. Without artistic revolution, there would be no art. Artists in Europe were rebelling against the plain art every day, every century. They get tired of the old stuff and they want to do something new. And I think that's part of what IAI is about too. To me, it's kind of like a revolution of art. We kind of brought that about during the 60s, which I think is why it's still potent today. We still see artists who were influenced by that. And so there was a lot of energy there. It was exciting.
I'm thinking about the art that Judy Chicago did when I see you in terms of bringing both fabric and handwork and pottery and it feels, particularly when you're talking about the ribbon work and the handwork and the importance of the maker tradition. We're still going through that revolution about whether or not the maker is an artist. And so I really appreciate that whole sense of being the maker, the craftsperson as well, and that that each creative person under that is an artist, including cooking.
Absolutely. The coat, that I showed, based on the coat that we use within our culture. When I was making that, one of the really important things to me was to, as finally as I had the ability to do it, was thinking about the handwork because all year round in the Osage community are not just women, but men, the whole family, creating clothing for their young children to go into our dance. It's a very lengthy, process. Materials are expensive. And I like that idea of, in these coats when 2 weeks ago at one of our ceremonials, we changed drum keepers and they gave away 10 of those coats. They had a year to do it. So you can imagine people stand up in your community and say, I will help you make that. Not one, not two, maybe 20. I will help you accomplish that. And it's a beautiful thing, that things have many hands touch it, because they know how important it is. And when you want your children to participate, you sit down as many evenings as it takes, you do your dishes and you get working. And I love that idea of this idea of this is so important to me. It's so important to my children that they know who they are and where they come from, just as what was said. that we will take this time to make this happen.
If there are no other questions, oh, it looks like we have one more question.
Last question goes to this lovely person.
Okay. Thank you so much. I wondered if you could speak about gender, because when I think about work, there's the narrative traditions and abstract traditions, and I was at the Art Institute at the same time you were, Linda, and it took me a few years to remember that there weren't any women professors, and there was a lot of abstract painting going on. So if you could just, it's not a very crisp question, but I would love it if you would speak about it. About, did you have women professors?
I had Joan Brown for drawing. And when I think about it now, I wish I would have taken more advantage of her when she was there. And as a young student, you're not always paying attention to some of the courses or the teachers, but I did have her, and I just wish that I would have, taken the time to talk to her. Of course, you don't think about that when you're younger, but she was about the only female, yeah. And then we had some art history instructors that were female, but you're right, most of them were male.
But I also thought it was so interesting that you spoke about your mother encouraging you to go to art school, and also Anita's grandmother, providing this, approval and nourishment.
Yeah, and that was kind of unusual because all the years that I taught, I had students that would say their family would discourage them from taking art or going to art school. And I always got encouraged, and I thought everyone else always, got encouraged to do whatever they wanted. So I just feel myself fortunate that my parents and my family supported me. And even though they didn't understand abstraction, my whole family, like out at Hopi, but they could see, when I would bring work home to show them, like even in images of drawings or maybe a postcard or cards that I would produce, they could see what the story was that I was doing in abstract form. And it always made me feel good that they knew what I was doing. So yeah, I got support, and I was fortunate because I know a lot of people didn't get encouraged or get that support from their family. It just made me a stronger person to keep going.
I would say there's a division between the sexes among my people, and there's things that women do and things that men do. As far as transgender, that's something that's acceptable. It's always been there. So women are made. It's where we're created. Those people are created, and we teach we're all created. No one made you. No one's ever going to make you. You were created by a higher power than what we are, and we always respect that. And our Sundance vision quests, wherever there are sacred ceremonies. We visited Cahokia this afternoon, and I was so thrilled to be there. I made an offering on top, as we are taught to do, because those are the spiritual places of our ancient ancestors. I was told by an anthropologist that, oh, these guys have nothing to do with you. And of course, in Europe, they claim they have something to do with a person that was crucified on a cross 2,000 years ago. And that may be related to those people. I mean, come on. Today, there's this idea that Native Americans stay in one place, we never go anywhere. They'll travel all the way across the country to a powwow. I mean, they've been all over the place. They know this country intimately, inside and out. And that was before there were road signs or freeways or the internet. That's just the way our culture is. And there's a lot of beautiful things about it. And I'm glad I came back from Europe to get back into it, so.
Anita, do you want to leave us with a final thought on gender and IA abstraction, Native American art in the contemporary moment?
Well, yes to all of these things that have been said, because it is that way, and there are things, definitely, and within my culture that men would not do, that are just appropriate for women to do. And I know some of these concepts are really hard for people, to kind of wrap your head around. In terms of, for instance, if you are providing nourishment all 4 days of our ceremonies, that's a woman's job. But we don't look at it as this is inequitable. We are nourishing our dancers. We are nourishing our community. We are helping them. When we're called upon, we are providing support and love for them, sometimes during difficult times. And so it is not looked at as how you would see it, outside of our culture, that this is kind of demeaning work or something. It's not thought of like that. We are seen as equal, but we have different roles within that. And in terms of abstraction and making art, and my grandmother was a great influence on me, but my dad was very encouraging. My dad was an artist. I mean, he was a pretty fine painter. He did it very privately. He painted nature scenes from nature, and he was great at painting elk and deer and that. And I remember watching him paint, and he was very encouraging to me. And he told me one time, in the beginning of my career, I was part of a group show at the National Museum for Women in the Arts, where they asked us to talk about our work, in a gallery setting, gallery talk. And afterwards, he said, I don't quite understand everything you are making, but I understand why you are doing it now.
Well, thank you so much. As we open this exhibition, as we begin to think more at this museum about, what the fullness of artistic continuity in Native North American art means, it's been such an honor and a privilege to spend the evening with you, hearing from you directly about your experiences at IAIA and how those have continued to shape your own careers and the field more broadly. So please join me in thanking the artists.
Thank you.